Hello and welcome. I'm Liz Booker, Literary Aviatrix, and today I am excited to talk with one of the co-authors of an awesome new book, All the Things Our Mommy Can Do, by Megan Biles and Samantha Arrington Sliney. Fewer than 10% of pilots and aircraft mechanics are women. These are their stories of tenacity, adventure, and courage. Stories with the power to inspire, heal, and connect. Welcome to the Literary Aviatrix community, where we leverage the power of story to build and celebrate our community and inspire the next generation of aviation. Samantha Arrington Sliney, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so excited to talk to you about this book and talk to you about your career and your co-author. Before we do that, can you give us a little synopsis of this book and then maybe do a reading?
Awesome. Yes. So, All the Things Our Mommy Can Do, it's told from the perspective of an older sibling watching their mother be pregnant while doing various jobs. All the jobs highlighted in the book are stereotypically male populated, so jobs that in present day American culture, you may not expect a woman to be doing, but certainly not expecting her to be doing while pregnant. And it was written to kind of inspire the next generation that pregnancy is not a limiting condition and that you can have the career you desire and the family you desire at the same time, whatever that might look like for you.
Awesome.
And with that, I'll start with the dedication page. This book is dedicated to every child who reads it. May you always believe in your limitless potential, knowing that your dreams and goals are not bound by your gender. May you pursue any career path you choose while having the family you desire. Dream big, little one. This book is inspired by the impactful work of the Department of the Air Force Women's Initiatives Team, DAF WIT. It is a reminder that although progress has been made, there is still a journey ahead to remove barriers so that all can reach their full potential. Together, let us empower the next generation to redefine the narrative about gender, career, and family. Little brother or sister who is on the way, I'm so excited for your birthday. Hurry up, little one, can't wait to see. Together we'll laugh and play, the best friends we'll be. Mommy, you're pregnant, I can hardly wait. Hurry and tell me, when is their due date? But now that you're pregnant, what does that change? Your tummy is larger. Does that feel strange? Our mother is so amazing even while she carries you. She's still doing what she loves. I love to watch her zoom. Because our mom is a pilot, soaring around up so high, even with a baby inside her, I watch her glide through the sky. Our mom is pretty rad. She loves to go really fast. I cheer her on at the speedway, so quick I barely see her pass. Racing ahead with speed and grace, that's our mommy winning the race. Growing a baby, yet she just doesn't slow. Our mom is amazing, I love to watch her go. Leading with wisdom, strength, and cheer, our mommy's a CEO, loved and revered. Our mom, she does everything, she's one of a kind. There is no one like her, I'm glad that she's mine. With a twirl of a wrench, she's good with oil and fuel. She's fixing the car. Oh, our mom is so cool. In boots and camis, I'm proud that she serves. Her country's peace she helps preserve. Our mommy is a brave soldier, beaming with pride. When she does what she loves, her eyes sparkle wide. Our mommy builds under the sun. With a baby on board, it's double the fun. Hammer and nails in her hand so tight, together they work from morning till night. Pursuing her passions, a family in tow, cheers and applause for her continue to grow. She shatters all doubts about what a mother can do, setting the perfect example for me and for you. Wearing combat boots or high heels, she stands so tall. Whether kissing boo-boos or closing a big deal, she conquers all. With support from family and friends, too, we'll be ready for the day we welcome you. Little one, your arrival we await. Your family's joy you'll elevate. See how strong our mommy is, shining so bright as you grow in her tummy, both day and night. In all that she does, she leads the way. Her actions speak of love, pure and true each day. All she does, all she is, and all she will be shows me just how much she loves you and me. Our mommy is a hero that you'll soon see. When you arrive, I know you'll wholeheartedly agree. She glows like the sun, so warm and bright, forever being our guiding light. Through past, present, and future days, she blazes trails in countless ways. Look at all the things our mommy can do, all while she's growing you.
I love it. And for the people who watch this, I'll put the pages on the screen so people can see these great illustrations of mommy pregnant in her uniforms and her business suits and her we've got the race car driver with her suit on, and this is a fabulous, inspiring book, and there's so much to talk about with it. And I thank you guys so much for putting this out, you and your co-author. I want to find out about you. So tell me a little bit about your background and your career.
Absolutely. So I am a JAG, a judge advocate by background. I served 10 years on active duty as a JAG in the Air Force. I recently transitioned to the Air National Guard, where I'm a JAG. And now, as a civilian, I actually work for the Department of Defense in the Defense State Liaison Office. So I focus on public policy and working with the state legislatures to inform and educate them on military-friendly law and policy. So I've really come full circle. So I identify many ways: a servicewoman, a veteran, a guardsman, a mother. I have 3 small children. They're 6, 4, and 16 months right now. So they're a large part of the inspiration and my why of a lot of the public policy work I've done, and a lot of the why for this book. So yeah, that's me. I'm also dual military. I shouldn't leave that out. It's a huge part of who I am. My husband's an Army soldier. So my entire military career, he's been in longer than I have, but has been dual military. He's served coming up on 20 years next summer. So been juggling all of those hats. But I was not from a military family growing up. The only exposure to the military that I had was my husband. He's a year older than me, and we started dating when I was still in high school. So that's kind of how I made it to where I was, because he was doing a lot of cool things as a Green Beret, and I was like, well, let me get a piece of that, because that sounds like fun.
And did you always aspire to be a lawyer?
I did not. So I went to undergrad to become, and I majored in journalism. So I love to write.
Okay.
I should add that as a kid, when folks asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, it was always an author. My mom has little books where I stapled paper together and like would scribble things on them. And in elementary school, they had like the Young Authors Conference. That was what I wanted to do. And so as I grew older, my love for writing kind of just resulted in me being very drawn to journalism. However, I realized very quickly that the market at the time for journalism outside Fort Liberty, North Carolina, wasn't really all that high. And I had really fallen in love with the law through my first amendment class that I had to take as part of my major. And so I kind of used both of those, and really my personal statement to law school was like, hey, I want to be a legal correspondent. And in order to do that, I need to have an understanding of the law. And then the foray with the military was after my first year of law school. You typically do an internship, and I lived at Fort Liberty, so it naturally went to the local Air Force JAG office and was like, hey, I want to volunteer, free labor. I just want to learn about what you do. And fell in love with everything about being a JAG, and kind of still love to write, but kind of left the journalism piece of it behind for a little while as I pivoted towards joining the military and learning what it took to be a judge advocate, and truly fell in love with serving.
That's awesome. And tell us about your co-author, Megan Biles, who I know is still on active duty, so couldn't be here with us today, but tell us about her background.
Yeah, Megan is a United States Air Force Academy grad. She is an AFSOC, Air Force Special Operations pilot by background. She's an absolute rock star. She's done many of the policy fellowships within the that the Air Force office offers. She's also done a lot of strategic policy opportunities that were offered to her. So she is truly just a fantastic human being. How her and I kind of got linked up was over our shared experiences with the Women's Initiatives team that I mentioned earlier. Megan and I were both doing separate efforts. I was kind of focused on lactation support through the Joint Travel Regulation, and she was kind of focused on support for pregnant cadets at USAFA and also parental leave parity. So offering parental leave to equal parental leave to either gender, just parental leave, not primary, secondary, not male, female. Everybody should get the same amount of time. And we did that work, and we never really crossed paths. But when we were both kind of offered to come on as the co-chair, so to lead the Women's Initiatives team, when I was asked to do so by Leah Nadeem, who's also a Air Force intel officer who was leading the WIT at the time, she asked me, was this something you want to do? And I was like, oh my gosh, I have 2 small children. I'm on active duty. I'm dual mil. Like, I don't know if I could do this by myself. And she's like, well, if you had to pick anybody, who would you pick to do it with? And without hesitation, I said Megan, because I knew enough about her and I'd seen enough of her work to know that that's who I wanted to work with and also learn from, because she's just truly a remarkable human being, and the Air Force's and Air Force Special Operations Command is so lucky to have her.
Do you know what Megan flew or flies?
Oh my goodness, I should. It's the AC 140. It's not the gunship. It's the other one. It's the one that uses to take people, special operations people, around the world. And she's done all that. I mean, she's got the combat experience. She's got the staffing policy experience. She truly is she is such an asset to the Air Force. And she just made Lieutenant Colonel. So I'm so happy that the Air Force recognized her value and continue to give her opportunities, because she's a powerhouse.
And can you tell me where the Air Force is these days on those 2 things I'm curious about? First of all, what the rules are around flying, if you know them, like when are pregnant women allowed to fly in the Air Force? And then you mentioned the leave parity. What are they getting for maternity leave these days, and how does that apply to the men as well?
Yeah, I'll start first with flying, what we call flying while pregnant. And Megan led the effort to change that. So that's another reason I think she's a rock star. I'll also say that Megan doesn't have children. Everything that she's worked through changing has been because she has saw how it has impacted others and informed her own personal decisions. And so I think that she's, by my definition of a servant leader. She's taking on these problems that don't necessarily impact her personally and changed it in some regards for not only the Air Force, but the Department of Defense. So right now, prior to 2022 in the Air Force, and I am not rated, but I have learned a lot about it. So apologies if I get any terminology wrong, but I'm going to channel my best Megan Biles right now. It used to be that as soon as you became pregnant, you went DNIF or down. You couldn't fly. And we have our mobility aircraft and we have our fighter aircraft, or our CAF aircraft. So for fighters, bombers, ejection seat aircraft, they had no pathway to fly while pregnant at all. It was, you're donezo. For our mobility aircraft, it was, hey, initially you go down, but at the 2nd trimester mark, you can try to get a waiver to fly. With the consent of your flight doc and your commander, you can fly. Right. Megan blew the narrative off of that, and that she went, why are we, and really the policy in Sam Sliney's opinion was based on the place of fear, because we didn't have a lot of data. We had no data, right? You can't study pregnant women for the longest time. It's allowed now. But there was no data. So it was this place of fear. Well, we don't know what it does to the fetus. We don't know how it impacts the baby's hearing. And so it was just a really example of a very risk-averse policy. that wasn't informed by data. So now, after 18 months of Megan tackling this, uh, you do initially go down, but whether you're CAF or MAF, you can apply for a waiver in the first trimester. You have to be briefed and you have to assume risk through your doctor. You have to prove that you've been briefed on any known or unknown risk, and then your commander gets to sign off on whether you fly. And then you can have that waiver renewed as you move trimester to trimester. So instead of it being a no because narrative, we have now moved to a yes but. And obviously, like with our fighters, there's limits on what you can do. Our intent never was to, right, women are over in combat, pulling multiple G's. It's really just so you can keep your qualifications up, so that way you don't have to get requalified or any of that stuff when you come back from parental leave, right? It's just to not put you behind your peers significantly. So, like I said, she blew the narrative off of that. And honestly, the idea of the book came after we had a meeting with the Secretary of the Air Force, Secretary Kendall, where we were celebrating that. We got called to the Pentagon to meet with him, and we left that celebration in his office. And Megan actually is the bigger poet than I am. She said a rhyme about flying while pregnant, and then I said something, and she said something, and then I had this epiphany, and I was like, "Oh my God, we need to write a children's book." And she's like, "Sam, no, you're not dragging me into anything else." And I'm like, "No, we're going to write a children's book." And we started working on the manuscript, and it kind of took off from there.
I love it so much. There's so much to unpack there. So we're going to talk more about that. But I did ask also, what does the leave look like for,
Yeah. So parental leave right
personally?
now, there's parity. So federal law requires that either parent, birth or non-birth, get 12 weeks of parental leave. That's across all the services. That's by law. So the services can't give less than that. For service women, I believe all the services now have a policy where you also get 6 weeks of con leave. So for the birth parent, you're getting 18 weeks total. Con leave you have to take all at once, but parental leave you can actually take in 7 week increments. So for me, with my third, I was actually able to come back to work for a couple weeks after I had my third child because there was some stuff I needed to get done, and then go back out for a few more weeks. And then I came back for a week, and then I went out till the end of it. So it provides a lot of flexibility and choice for the parent.
That's phenomenal. That is just so different than my experiences, which we'll talk about. That's incredible. And so you guys decided to put this book out, and I love what you did with it by including, you didn't make it a military focus. You included so many different fields that this has such broad appeal. I feel like it has a huge market. So talk a little bit about that decision.
So we recognized, you know, I believe one of the things that I believe in is policy change informs culture. And so with that policy change with flying while pregnant, I'm like, well, what are we doing to change the culture around pregnancy in general? And Megan and I have many conversations about that. A lot of, right, what we see in the military is because we're an all volunteer force. It's beliefs of American society that influence what we believe in the military. Um,
Right.
so we were like, well, how do we change culture? Well, you start changing culture with the generations that are behind us and with children. You
Hmm.
catch them very early whenever their personas and their personalities are developing, and you're really, showing them what they can be. I also, about the same time, I saw an advertisement called the Dream Gap. I don't remember. I think it was done by Mercedes or something like that. And it was older, but I had never seen that. And it just like, I mean, I'm not generally a very emotional person like that. It sent chills. And I think I was crying by the end of the advertisement, the way that advertisement kind of.
Well, describe it for me because I don't think I've seen that particular
Yeah,
one.
so it's called the Dream Gap, but it starts with young girls dressed in uh, male populated career fields like uniforms, and how they, as a young girl, you dream of that over time. And then as you grow up, the idea and stereotype of what a girl can do or a girl should do creates the dream gap with that generation, because it's also that mantra of like, you can't be what you don't see.
Yeah.
And so that informed a lot of, that's why we need to target this demographic. And that's why we chose the career fields that are represented in the book, because while we both obviously love the military, that's where we've both grown up and it means a lot to us. That's not the be all end all, right? The same
Right.
issues that impact military aviators impact commercial aviators, impact engineers in STEM career fields. We see that a lot with the Space Force, right? STEM career fields don't have a lot of representation from women. Um,
Right.
so that's what informed us kind of wanting to be broader, because we really wanted to try to shift American culture over how we view pregnancy, and how we view the balance of career and family.
Well, I absolutely love the work that you guys have done, and thank you so much for that, for using your positions and your experiences, your connections, to do this work and to impact policy for the benefit of the women who come behind us. I did my small part in the Coast Guard to help that, and there's a long backstory to why and how that came about, but I definitely was inspired to use whatever position power um, and my own personal experience to positively influence the policies that were driving, what we could and couldn't do, and also the impressions of, what pregnant women are able to do. And also like the fact, just to reiterate or to emphasize, that pregnancy is a temporary condition. It does have a beginning, middle, and end, mostly hopefully joyous.
Yep.
But we're still the fully trained enlisted members or officers that we were when we got pregnant, and we will continue to be afterwards. And this was something that I found myself having to remind leaders and peers about during my own experiences, confronting sort of attitudes of like, oh, well, if you're pregnant, you're useless to us. And so I found myself having to work really hard to prove that I wasn't useless, and probably driving myself harder than I should have in some ways. I know at the beginning of this, you said that pregnancy isn't a limiting condition. But frankly, every pregnancy is different. Every woman's body is different. And sometimes it can be a limiting condition. And so what you talked about, in the military, having a waiver, having to request a waiver, and having other people be involved in the decision about whether you can fly or not. I was generally uncomfortable with that. You know, why should I have to ask a commander who has no medical training at all, and who has never been pregnant themselves? Why do I need to ask their permission to continue doing my job when I know my body is good to go? And then also, how do I manage, not because I've had all of the experiences. I I transferred from a ship in my first pregnancy just in time and was able to go to my primary training because I was very junior. And you could not be in your primary training for any specialty in your third trimester. So I was able, with the help of my executive officer on my ship, as a very junior enlisted person, he championed me to kind of, because of my performance, based on my performance, to kind of cut the line and get into training so that I could finish it before my third trimester. And I'm not sure where my career would have gone. I mean, these are early days. I was 20 years old. So I'm not sure what my career path would have looked like if I hadn't had that support from that executive officer to get me into training and have his advocacy to get my career moving as quickly as possible. And then fast forward, I had one child every 10 years. So fast forward to me now winging with my 6-year-old, pinning my wings on my chest from naval flight training, and being in the second year of my first operational tour as a pilot, knowing that I was at the age where now I'm 30 and I want to have more children, trying to figure out how to navigate that. I was with other women, but none of them had had children themselves. I had my own child, but I didn't know any other female pilots who did. And so almost universally, I was advised by my male peers when I asked for family planning guidance. They directed me to contact this 105 woman that they knew who had done it, and I was an 03, and I was just not comfortable cold calling an 05 to ask for family planning advice. So I kind of navigated it on my own. Had to educate the command on our pregnancy policy, what I was allowed to do, had to convince my flight surgeon that I was good to go and could fly. And I was able to do that up until my third trimester. The Coast Guard's rules were you could fly, kind of like what you changed to. You go med down the first when you find out you're pregnant, and then you go through, all your tests to make sure you're physically capable. And then you have this trifecta of a decision with the flight surgeon, the commanding officer, and the pregnant mother. And I was able to continue flying until about 5.5 months. And I'll talk more about why I went down after that. And then the third pregnancy, 10 years later, was kind of not really planned. I was having some medical issues related to my birth control. I was having migraines. And I'm sharing that because I was experiencing migraines associated with my menstrual cycle, and it never occurred to me that birth control was the contributing factor there. I was going through all kinds of neurological tests. I was completely hospitalized. That's how bad it was. I was outside the emergency room vomiting, and I'm the chief pilot for an operational unit, so it's not ideal. And then as soon as I went off the birth control, I was cured of my migraines, which was magical. But then, the negotiation process at home didn't work out necessarily as efficiently as it could have. And surprise, I was pregnant again. But at this point, now I'm 40, and I am quote unquote an aged mother. And so I made the decision, on my own authority as part of that trifecta, that this time I wasn't going to fly. I'd had a couple of miscarriages. I was an aged mother and higher risk, and so I chose not to fly, and that did affect my career. So yeah, all of these things that you did, I was involved in helping get rid of a small comment in our policy that referred to a 1980s study on chicken embryos that the U.S. Army did that suggested that the unborn fetus might be affected in their hearing by flying in rotary wing aircraft. And it was absolutely absurd. We had multiple women who had been helicopter pilots who had flown while pregnant. Their children, my children's hearing was fine. And so we were able to because all that did was confuse the flight surgeons and the commanding officers. And just like you talked about it being based from a place of fear, and also, I guess probably trying to protect the service from issues as well. So much goes into it. It's not as straightforward like any pregnant woman can jump in an aircraft and fly. There are a lot of nuances to it. It is dependent on the individual situation, but it's nice not to have policy that puts a blanket restriction on your abilities, because your operational contributions do affect your professional progression. So I know that's a lot of stuff of my own laying that out there, but just to emphasize what an important topic this is to me personally.
Yeah, absolutely. Liz, can we take a small break? I have a 6-year-old trying to get my attention.
Yeah. Yeah. We're going to keep that in the recording.
Sorry about that. Oh gosh.
No,
So I jotted down all these notes based on what you just said. I'm just sitting here. I'm like, yes, this is all the stuff that we were confronted with when we changed this policy. So, this idea that pregnancy is a limiting condition, one of the things that we stressed very hard to senior leaders when we were having this conversation was, you trust these aviators to step to the aircraft every day. And if they have, and I'm speaking to the choir here though, I mean, if there's anything going on with your body at all that you feel would create an operational risk, you can bow out at any time. Now, the culture part of that, we can talk that a separate conversation. That is certainly, and we experienced that with some of the pushback to the flying while pregnant is, well, people feel forced to fly while pregnant. Well, they feel like that is now the expectation to fly while pregnant. And we recently, on the heels of this, the Air Force rolled out a survey to actually poll the aviator community to see if that was actually happening or not. We haven't seen the readout from that data, but we really focused on, look, you trust these aviators to make these calls every time they step to the aircraft. This is no different than that. This is no different than if I have a sinus infection, if I have something else going on similar to that. So if you're going to trust them to make those, you have to trust them to make decisions about their bodies. Pregnancy is no different. We really focused on, when we talk about the choice, right? Like, I really personally struggle with, someone else having authority over, what I'm feeling about my body. We went back and forth with the medical community over this, their idea that they controlled it. And we were, right. I think we got to a point where they were able to understand, like, no, medical community has no authority. Like, I'm a JAG. I'll be the first to admit that. JAGs have no authority. Neither does the medical community, right? Like, you are giving a recommendation to the commander. And we tried to stress to the commanders that we were talking to that when you are looking at the risk analysis, like, you're looking at risk to mission or force. And if you make the call that there is a risk, that if you're making the call to not let someone fly, at least sit them down and explain them to them, because every service member understands risk to force, risk to mission. And as the commander, if you're going to make that type of call, you owe it to that member to sit them down and explain the why behind that. And most aviators that I know will understand it. That's term. We tried to couch it in terms that they understand, they speak in, that are part of their culture, rather than it being treated as this very weird thing that we don't really talk about, we don't let people do. So that was something that was very, very heavy on our mind. We also tried to, we should talk about this just like we talk about any other medical condition. Because one of the pieces of data that we were actually, you talked about the whole audio impact to fetuses. We ran into that, I don't know how many times, where they're like, well, we don't know. And we were able to turn the tables and say, well, you know what we do know? A white male over the age of 40 is more likely to experience catastrophic kidney stones in flight than a woman is to experience a catastrophic miscarriage while pregnant. We do know that. The data shows that. And we were able to utilize the data. We do had to kind of fight back against those narratives, because we were like, you don't make, white men over 40 take whatever test is required to see if you got an ultrasound to see if you got kidney stones every time they go in the air. No. What do? You trust them, just like you trust every other aviator, to make that call on how they feel that day, how their body is feeling to them. So those were those things I jotted down as you were speaking, because those were the exact conversations we were having with senior leaders. It was also really interesting to see when we talk conscious, unconscious bias come into play. I always start from the perspective that most leaders want to do the right thing, right? They want to take care of airmen. They want to take care of guardians. But I was able to see firsthand unconscious bias and what it does to people. I mean, I was on a meeting, and thankfully the DAF WIT, we have very strong senior champions who are typically general officers or senior executive service members who are in meetings with us to kind of squash things. And this was squashed. But a very senior leader, male general officer, when we were having these conversations, was like, I just, he tried to like couch this as, oh, well, my daughter is an aviator in the Air Force. My daughter's an aviator in the Air Force. And I just can't ever imagine a reality in which she would want to fly while pregnant. So he thought, I think, saying that he has a daughter, it would take the sting away from. And then he followed it up with, and, well, where is the father getting an option to say what their opinion is on whether the should fly or not? And
What?
and this is not a meeting like a one-on-one meeting. This was like a group of people. And so when I
What year is this? I'm
yes,
sorry.
the
What?
unconscious, because I mean, I really don't think he realized what he said until our senior champion at the time came over the top and was like, well, first of all, no one on this phone is your daughter. No one on this phone is your mother, your wife, your niece, any of those things. Secondly, you might want to not speak for your grown daughter. Maybe she actually doesn't feel that way. And then secondly, you're assuming that there is a father involved. And when we talk the definition of what the modern military family is, um, it is, it is not what the military was built off of in the 1940s
Right.
of male service member, stay at home wife takes care of the children. The modern military family doesn't look like that any longer. And in fact, making the assumption that there is even a father in the picture can be very insulting to the birth parents.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and having those types of senior leaders that can kind of come over the top, that have, wear some stars up here because no one's going to listen to the little old Major Sliney over here, come over the top and kind of quash that was invaluable. And not to mention the message that it sent to everybody else that was on that phone call.
Well, good for you that you had that top cover. Because let me just share a little story about my experience. So, this third child that I had, I'm 40 years old. I'm an '05, and I'm the chief pilot at a unit. And of course, we call them the operations officers. And of course, they're going to have the operations officer conference while I am on maternity leave, of course. And so we can go back to talking about like the kind of pressure that we put on ourselves to carry our load while we're pregnant to compensate for the fact that we're not able to do that operational duty for some period of time, which I definitely did. And I know others, and I want to talk more about that. But just this particular experience. So I felt compelled, even though I was still on maternity leave. I'd had a C-section. My child was 5 weeks old. I packed up my entire family because I was nursing the baby. I packed up my whole family and took them to Colorado, to the hotel where we were having this Ops Boss conference. And I'm, going back and forth to the room where my husband is working online, taking care of the baby. I go up there to nurse. We wear the same light blue shirts that you guys wear. So I'm in my light blue shirt, sitting at the back of this conference room, hoping that I don't leak on my shirt, right? And I'm the only woman. I was one of two sitting operations officers, female sitting operations officers at the time, but I was the only one in the room. And my boss's boss, my direct chain of command in '06, stood at the front of the room while the detailer was there giving his briefing. And I had been, just prior to this assignment, I had been the detailer. I had been an assignment officer. So I had heard all of it before. And this was one of the few moments in my career where I was on my toes and ready. But this '06 stood up and said, when are you going to stop assigning so many women to individual air stations? What if they all get pregnant at the same time? And he knows I'm in the back of the room. I'm in his rating chain. So he's directing this at me. And I had like 5 women at my unit at the time out of 18 pilots. And I just said, when are we going to prohibit sports on the hangar deck? Because I have more guys down for, twisted ankles and broken legs than all of the women who ever got pregnant in the entire Coast Guard in all of time. Like, give me a break. And there was a little hyperbole there, but like, for real.
Mm-hmm.
Give me a break. And so I was going to ask you, and thanks you brought that up. I was going to ask you, like, what absurd, obstructions were you presented with, and how did you navigate those? And you've given me a couple of examples. Were there any other?
So yes, that the one about the birth parent that stands out most in my mind. We had another one um, come up in a meeting. It was a personal testimony from an aviator that said that she had flown while pregnant and like her stomach started turning blue. It like asphyxiation of the baby, I think, is what they were getting at, and not to diminish anybody's personal experience, but that when that was brought up, that led down a whole tangent of, oh my gosh, what was happening? Was the baby cut off with oxygen? All of these things, which were worst case scenario planning. And we always, as the women's initiative team and the policy work I do, I always turn back to the data. What does the data say? And where do we have a data gap? Okay, I hear your lived testimony. Is there a scientific research study that shows that? Are you willing to let docs look at your medical records so that we can? Because no one wants to put anybody in a situation where we could know a risk and that person isn't able to knowingly assume whatever that risk is. But that led down a whole tangent. Outside of flying while pregnant, I mean, I've heard a member of the senior executive service compare shipping breast milk to shipping meat while PCSing, and saying that, well, we don't pay for folks to ship their meat, but if they buy half a cow, why would we pay for them to ship breast milk? And then also, can't you just go buy it? So that was fascinating. Again, male, I don't know his marital status, but male senior executive service member. So that was that was very interesting.
Wow.
And I always try to take these as opportunities to educate. I will tell you, good news story. The most authentic. I had a meeting with a general officer, 3-star, now a 4-star in the Air Force. We were in a meeting talking about lactation support, and we consider this person a huge ally internal to the department, has helped with the Free the Bun initiative, all of those things. And I'm sitting here talking about why it's so important for us to provide breast milk transport costs for everyone. And I keep saying breast milk stash. And he stops me. He says, Sam, stop. I was like, oh gosh. And he's like, can you please just tell me what a breast milk stash is and why it's so important? And I had the moment of realizing, like, he's recognizing how profound this is. He's recognizing he has a blind spot. He is the most senior person on this phone call, and he stops me and just asks the question. Shows a moment of vulnerability, which is not always easy for, our 3 and 4 stars to do. I proceed to explain it to him and why it's so important. And he goes, why is this still a problem? He's like, women have been able to serve since 1948. He's like, last time I checked, they've always been able to lactate. Why is this still a problem? I was like, thank you, sir. Thank you so much. But to me, that was if you have a blind spot or unconscious bias, there's a right way to ask it to be educated, and then there's definitely a wrong way to do it. And I've seen both done in my experience doing policy work. We hear some outrageous things, but I try to always take them as a moment to educate. And I try to start from, although it sometimes is hard to start, that people are not malicious in nature. It's hard. It can be hard.
Not all people are malicious in nature.
It's hard sometimes, but and then always going back to, does this person have the authority to tell me no? Who is the person who has the authority to tell me yes on this? And
I like your style.
That goes back to just military chain of command. Who owns the authority? And I can respectfully disagree and say, I appreciate your feedback. We'll incorporate that as necessary. It's great for red teaming, right? Which is something.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, now I know what I'm up against.
Now I know what I'm up against.
Exactly.
And kind of move on from there. But it can be it can be really hard for folks. I will tell you, the flying while pregnant, I think most people would have assumed that effort was being led by an aviator that had children. But to be quite honest, when we collected anecdotal stories from aviators that I, trust, that are just rock stars, great leaders, they very frequently were like, I can't do this. I just cannot deal with the stupidity. I cannot. I can't. It's because they had
too close.
Because they had been
too close to the issue.
Yes, and they had been through so much. They're like, and also the idea that we're putting that additional burden on the shoulders of somebody who has already been shouldered with so much burden. And I've had people tell me, like, it's not, I refuse. If they can't do, meaning, whatever service that you're in, can't do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, I don't have the emotional or mental bandwidth to deal with it. Like,
Yeah.
and I get it. And I think that's honestly quite right. I'm not an aviator at all. Like, I've had all three of my kids on active duty. It's
Yeah.
definitely not my lived experience. But then Megan, she doesn't have children, but she saw so many people experience that. So I think that's why we made a good team when we were able to kind of push that, because we didn't kind of have that initial sting, right? When people would say outrageous things, I didn't have, I didn't, I had some pretty drastic reactions, but I think I was able to curb them, and so was she a little bit, because it wasn't my personal lived experience. And when we're working through initiatives with the WIT, we will strategically pick people to brief things to senior leaders that maybe are not as close to the problem for that reason.
Well, all the more remarkable that we collectively and the ladies in the Air Force had you representing. Oh, there's so much to talk about. I want to go back to something that you said about pointing to the data. And so what I discovered, so I was in the detailer shop. I was the assignment officer, one of two assignment officers for the pilots in the Coast Guard. The other one was also a woman at the time. Both of us had children. And so we were both working on these issues together. Thankfully, I had her at least to keep me company in this crusade. But the, in dealing with the flight surgeon corps and asking, like, why are we just to go back to this 1980s study about our Army chicken embryos and hearing, why are we basing our recommendations and decisions on a study of chicken embryos? Why don't we do a study of women who have had children? And the answer that I got back was, well, we can't do studies on pregnant women. And I'm like, well, okay, but you can ask me questions now. I've had 3 children. Why don't you do that kind of study, like a retrospective study on women who have already done it and gather data that way? So tell me, like, you mentioned that something has changed in terms of being able to gather data on pregnant women. Tell me how you navigated that.
So after we changed the policy, immediately we worked with the Air Force Survey Office to start developing a follow-up survey that we were going to send out after implementation. Quite frankly, a lot of that drove that was the data collection, but also the whole culture shift, right? We did not want anybody to feel like they had to do something they were not comfortable with, or had to make a choice because there was this pressure. So that was the initial catalyst for it, because that was a big pushback that we got, huge pushback. So they've done that. They've done the survey, the initial survey. My understanding, not to speak for the survey office, but my understanding is that they will continue to do that over time, to collect that data, at least internal to the Air Force, and measure that. And honestly, a lot of what we get is just anecdotal. We talk to a lot of people, not necessarily, like I said, we heard from the aviator that had what she characterized as a very traumatic experience, and she went on to say that her baby did have some deficits. We wanted to hear that. We also want to, if there, Lord forbid, there is something like that happens, like, is there a connection? Is there a connection?
Right.
And this is another thing I didn't understand. And this is just, I flew with my first, probably, I was very small, so you couldn't tell I was this far along. I think I flew on a commercial aircraft till I was like 37 weeks. I probably should not have been on the aircraft at 37 weeks, but I was on the back of the plane traveling for work. And it's like, every time I'm on a plane, you see a woman that's flying while pregnant. And I get it, right? Like, the exposure to radiation is different, whether you're in the back or the front. Military aircraft are different than civilian, but, like, there's data there to collect. Why are we not collecting it? Like, I've never filled out this. I've flown with all 3 of mine as a passenger on a commercial airliner, and no one's ever asked me to fill out any type of survey or anything like that. But that's data that's left untapped on the table. I think sometimes, particularly the medical community, because of their very strict research guidelines and getting stuff approved through the IRB, because they're so used to that narrative that we don't think about the other pockets of data we could use. Now, maybe they're not as reliable as a official medical study, but it's still data. It's still stuff that we can use to make decisions. So we've been able to use that we'll do unofficial feedback mechanisms for the WIT. We can't do official surveys, but we can ask people for their feedback. Like, hey, we have one rolling out here pretty soon on shoes. So in the Air Force, we can only wear rounded toe shoes, dress shoes with our service dress, and they're at shorter. A lot of people can't find them, especially if you have very wide feet or you wear a very large size. So we're rolling out a survey to see if people have experienced any medical issues with their feet because they're required to wear shoes that don't fit appropriately. Should we expand it? So we really try to always couch it from readiness, because that's what it is. I didn't ask to have a ponytail because I wanted to look cute, despite what some people out there. No, it started with our aviators. Our aviators would have to be out of regs to fly with their helmets on because they couldn't.
Every time I flew, I waited until after I got out of the cockpit to shave my head. So I had a ponytail hanging down my back every time I flew.
It's outrageous to me. And in the Air Force, it took us, I think the Navy did it before us in 2018, but in the Air Force, 5 years of volunteer advocacy for us to get ponytails. Yeah. And that just blows my mind. And I saw so much with our women that had flown, right? They would have their helmet on getting off the aircraft, or they're walking to step into the aircraft holding their helmet and they have a braid, and someone on Facebook or some social media is lighting them up for being out of regs.
Right.
I'm like,
this
just does not compute. It just does not compute for Sam.
Absolutely. Okay, I have two threads here that I want to hang on to before we move on to other things. So just thinking about the decision-making matrix just for the individual, I had a friend who said to me, this was in that second pregnancy where I did end up flying up until 5.5 months. One of my friends, a male friend who, this guy was riding his bicycle to work one day and a car knocked him off the road and he tucked and rolled and broke his collarbone. He had to be med down for some period of time like that. And what he said to me was, have you thought about the fact that, if you have a hard landing when you're not pregnant, you could walk away from that and, maybe with just minor injuries or, or maybe just not have anything. But whereas if you're pregnant, you could have a greater impact on, maybe on that pregnancy. And so that was something that I internalized and really thought about. And then I chose to fly anyway because I felt like, I can control things that I could control. I could get in a car accident driving to work too. So, I wasn't out there. I mean, I did stand search and rescue duty. I did launch, in the middle of the night while I was pregnant. But I wasn't from my perspective, I wasn't putting myself in higher risk situations than I would normally do operationally. I'm curious to know. But then we talked about how my last pregnancy, I chose not to fly, and that did affect my career. What protections does the Air Force have in place? How are women who do choose to have children, especially if they're billeted to an operational unit where they're actively flying and they get pregnant, what mechanisms are there in place to help protect their career progression and not have that negatively impact them?
Yeah, I think this is something that we're still working through, to be quite honest. I do think, and I believe Jessica Ruttenber, but she was the catalyst for getting pregnancy discrimination as a protected category under equal opportunity. That happened, I believe it was in the fiscal year 21 NDAA, where she was actually able to get that in there. So that first, we're starting from the perspective of, you can discriminate against somebody who's pregnant in the military. We were excluded from the original statute that prohibited that. So now we have that. I can't say, even though it's been some time, that it's been fully implemented, but it is a protected category. And so if you go to IG or EO or MEO, pregnancy discrimination is unlawful. The law for service members, you cannot do it. Now, I realize that there are definite barriers to utilizing those processes, that many people who utilize those processes are ostracized and different things. So that's when I say it's not perfect. We are also, the Women's Initiative team, taking a hard look at how we promote. And this is an interesting topic, too. So we've talked a lot about, even with the parental leave, right? In the Air Force, with our officer performance briefs or our enlisted performance briefs, EPBs, OPBs, there's a number of days that you're supervised on there. Usually it says 365, right? It's a year evaluation. Right. We have looked at whether or not parental leave or any type of con leave, if you're not at work, should that be excluded? Before parental leave became equal between genders, the big pushback was no, you're going to make it worse. You're going to highlight that I was out on pregnancy leave, and I don't want it to be highlighted because I'm just going to bust my butt while I'm at work to get stuff done. But now that there's parity, this is an ongoing conversation between folks about what is the right way to capture this. How do you determine? How do you measure? And most of the time we're talking the unconscious bias part of this, right? We've struggled with what does right look like, because quite frankly, you have some women who are vehemently, I do not want it captured anywhere on there. Because I don't.
Well, that's interesting, because I was going to share that in our evaluation system, we were prohibited from using gender pronouns. So you're trying to keep it as gender neutral as possible, and B, prohibited from mentioning any medical conditions whatsoever. And so what I found being difficult, for me personally, and for some of the women who worked with me who had children, was that there was no way to explain why your flight hours were so low, or why maybe you didn't have quite as many projects as your teammates did. And so because I couldn't explain it, that worked to my disadvantage.
Yep. Yeah. We struggle with the same thing. And I don't think we've actually made much headway on how we, the root cause of the problem here, which is the lack of women representation at the senior ranks, and getting after that problem. And I just don't think it's not an easy problem to solve, definitely, but you do have very distinguished, at least internal to the Air Force, that's my experience, distinguished camps of folks who they at least want they don't want a blanket answer. They don't want it to be, well, if you're out on parental leave, it doesn't count in your days of supervision. Or they want a choice. Either I get to choose it's in there, or I don't get to choose it's in there. You talk to some board presidents that have sat on promotion boards, and they're like, look, I have 2 minutes to review every record. I don't even look at that. All I look is the substance. Well, then it gets you to, okay, well, should there be a block or something where you get to check it? And then even if you do, how do you stop that from being used negatively? So now it's a negative indicator versus explaining the records. I do think that, at least in the Air Force, there has to be representation on the board. So I think sometimes having a woman represented, although here's a negative to that, right? First of all, you don't know what that woman's experience is. Secondly,
exactly.
In certain communities, like the fighter community in the Air Force, you don't have very many 06 women. And so guess who is getting tapped for every single promotion board? And now what does that mean? She's drawn away from her tactical level duties because she's getting called away to do these board things, right? And so it's a balance. I wish that is one thing that we continue to tackle that I don't think we've arrived on. But I do think the getting pregnancy discrimination as a protected category was a good start. And hopefully as things continue to go along, they will get better. I did have another crazy story I thought about that I think this people who might listen to this might appreciate. So we mentioned that before ejection seat aircraft, it was like a no-go. Cannot do it. Can't be on an ejection seat because if you eject, the likelihood of you and baby, or the fetus causing a miscarriage from ejection. They didn't have data, but they're like, it's got to be higher. It's got to be.
Right.
I just could not. This was very hard for me to understand. I'm very logical, very rational because, right, I'm like, but you will let a woman fly in a non-ejection seat aircraft where if that aircraft goes down, her and the baby are dying. Whereas in an ejection seat aircraft, at least somebody's being like, are you saying like the mother's just like chopped liver and doesn't matter? It didn't make sense to me. It wasn't based on data, but they kept turning like, fighters, absolutely not. We cannot because it's ejection seat and we don't know what it'll do. I mean, so, but at least one person is being saved. And then we even asked the question, well, what does safety data said? Like, what is legitimately the risk of there being a catastrophic Class A mishap where the plane actually goes down? And that number is thankfully very, 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 very small. So then the question was like, what really is the risk? So that was another crazy narrative we had to kind of combat because we even had some folks that sit on bombers where to be instructor pilots, they couldn't sit in one of the seats because it's ejection seat, but there's like a seat towards the back where it's not, but they required the pregnant woman to wear a parachute. So, crazy stuff. I don't know where it all came from, but I had to share that one because that was something as a non-flyer, I really struggled with understanding. I'm like, so you would rather everybody go down than the chance of someone's life being saved?
Well, thank you for bringing some reason to the questions. I think that we all, like all of the women in the service, or the majority of us, we're conforming to a culture that was established, like you talked about, really cemented in the 1940s and post World War II, that didn't include women in most, and certainly not in any significant numbers. And the women that were their survival skill was to assimilate. And so I think we all are kind of stuck still in observing or questioning everything through the male lens in the traditional family structure of the 1940s and 50s. And so when we do that, we, men and women, if we continue to do that and we can't apply any creativity to this problem, you're just not only losing out on operational capability and readiness, but also your longevity of your workforce and who you're developing. There was a great study that, came out probably like between 2000 and 2010. They made a book of it, on ramps and off ramps. It was a Harvard Business School study of the companies that did the best job of long-term retention, allowing women to take breaks to take care of their children and also for elder care. But those women, you don't lose all your skill sets because of this temporary condition of being pregnant. And like that I think probably needs to be reiterated more than anything. And then just, we could go on and on about stories. I mean, I can tell stories about flight mechanics who were not, our flight mechanics work on the aircraft, and then the flight mechanic qualification is actually an active operational qualification where they're in the back of the aircraft operating our hoists and those kinds of things. And they get paid, whereas pilots get flight pay. Mm-hmm. As long as you're assigned to an operational billet. The enlisted flight mechanics only get paid if they accumulate hours doing their job. And there's like this complicated calculation of how many hours did you fly for this many months and will you get flight pay. And so some of those women, when we started getting together at the Women in Aviation International Conference and being able to talk to each other, because this was a big deal, women were serving in isolation at various units, experiencing these various problems with their commands and not having connections or a network to consult with, to compare notes with, or to raise our collective voices with. And so that was another thing that I'm very proud of, is getting us together at Women in Aviation International every year so that our collective voice could be broadcast to, our senior leadership, so that it wasn't just one squeaky wheel off in some single unit somewhere who has an individual problem. This is a systemic issue. And so highlighting the fact that, women were hiding their pregnancies and getting away with flying for as long as they could on the enlisted side, and not telling the flight surgeon, not telling their command, and admitting this years later, like, I didn't tell anybody because I was going to lose my flight pay for those months. So many complex issues related to this. And as long as we continue to look at it through a 1950s lens, we're not going to get anywhere, and the service is going to suffer. Operational readiness is going to suffer. Career progression and retention are going to suffer.
Oh, I can't agree more. Another fun fact: do you know how the services, when the Air Force was standing up, or when the services were standing up and women were required to integrate, how they agreed that the bob and the bun were the right hairstyles for women?
Tell me.
So in the WIT's research, the team that led that effort, they actually went to the archives to look up, because all of those hearings are transcribed, right? Like if the U.S. government does anything well, it's to keep those historical records. They all go to the National Archives. And essentially, to paraphrase, because, women they only wore skirts when they first came in. They had to go to etiquette classes. They wore high heels everywhere they went. You hear this talked about in the books about the WASP, like the kind of uniforms things they had to battle with. But the decision was made like, we can't have women too attractive because they'll be sleeping with all the other spouses' husbands that they're working with. But we can't have them too butch because they'll all just be lesbians. So the solution to those two problems was the bun and the bob. You don't look too attractive, but you're not too butch, and I'm using the language that was used there to come up. That is what that policy was based in. Not safety, not operational readiness, nothing tied to medical. It was simply, this is what we're worried. We're worried about them sleeping with the men, and we're worried about them becoming lesbians.
Very illuminating on, that speaks volumes about so many other things, so many other cultural issues that we still face today in these organizations. Well, Sam, I know that you need to get going. There's so much more that we could talk about. Before we go, if some young Air Force officer or Air Force enlisted woman, especially an air crew member or any kind of, high demand, physically demanding operational specialty, finds herself pregnant and is faced with maybe some negative repercussions, just what advice do you have for her?
Absolutely. That's a great question. First of all, reach out to the Women's Initiatives team. We have a huge Facebook group. We have, you can email me directly. I'm still in the Guard, so I have an active email.
Is that only open to Air Force members, or is that all military?
The Women's Initiative team is all Air Force, Department of the Air Force, so Air and Space Force members. However, the Army has a WIT now, and so does the Navy. The Coast Guard, I believe, has their Women in Leadership group that they started as well. So all the services have a WIT-like entity except for the Marine Corps. They do not have one. But
keep my mouth shut on that
one. So reach out to me if you need support. Know that you are not alone. You are not the first person to go through this. There are people there that are willing to help you navigate it. Explore your options for how you want to handle the situation, or if you just don't understand the policy. If you're a woman in another service, we have shared our data with Flying While Pregnant with both the Navy and the Coast Guard in hopes that it can inform some policy decisions on their side. If that's something you want to work, reach out. We are happy to share that. We love collaborating jointly. But also, don't walk past a problem, even if it's not impacting you. And I mentioned Megan being the perfect example of that. She didn't walk past not one problem. None of them impacted her. And she went on to change the landscape for service members across the Department of Defense. If you're experiencing it, most likely someone else is experiencing it. Don't take no from someone who can't give you a yes. So if it's that flight doctor saying, this is how it's going to be. Understand that they're a doctor. They're there to advise you, to help you weigh the risk. But in most cases, I won't say all, they aren't the decision maker. It could be the commander. It could be you personally. So explore your options. And then the very last thing is finding your why. I mentioned this earlier. On the really hard days, at least for me doing public policy work, I get told no a lot by a lot of different people. And it can be hard, quite frankly, especially when it's very common sense things, the right things that we should be doing, because they do impact readiness, recruitment, and retention. But I'm able to reflect back on my why, and that's what really gives me the strength on those hard days. My why, and I always like sharing this, is my children. I have 2 boys and a girl, and because they have dual military parents, like their chances of serving are like 50% more likely than most. So at least one of my children is probably going to be in the military.
One of mine is.
And
yep.
I always give this example too. If it's my son who decides to serve and he's a pilot and he looks to his right and he sees a woman, I don't want him to think that, I don't even want him to know I just want him to know that's another aviator. I don't want him to think about the challenges she's going to have to face. How can she pee in the aircraft? If she's pregnant, is she going to be grounded? I don't want that to even cross his mind. And on the converse, if it's my daughter who looks to her right, or the man sitting next to her looks to his right and sees her, I don't want her to actually be experiencing any of those challenges as she navigates her career. I want her to be able to focus on the mission, to being tactically competent, good at her job, and not have to worry about some of this frivolous, extraneous things that women just shouldn't have to worry about.
That's right. Well, we see one of your little people there, and I know you have to run. Sam, thank you to you, and thank you to Megan. Please pass on our appreciation for all of the work that you've both done to advocate for us. Shout out to Jessica Ruttenber for all of her work, because she's out there still advocating for all of us, as am I. This has been lovely. I love your book. I wish you the best success. I know that there are other books in your future. If you want to say anything about that, I'll give you the window right now.
Absolutely. So I'm hoping to do a phase 2 of the book, which is all the things our daddy can do. I did post some call to action on my social media accounts on LinkedIn and Facebook about some ideas, because we want to highlight all the non-traditional roles that dads feel in their family and even in jobs, because we understand that is a cultural narrative that we need to change as well.
Well, we will look forward to that. And where can we find you in your book?
My book is available on Amazon, both ebook, hardback, and softback copy. If you would like a signed copy, please hit me up on one of my social media accounts. I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram, and we can arrange getting you a signed copy as well.
Okay, what's your handle on Instagram?
Samantha Arrington Sliney.
Awesome, Sam. Thank you. Wishing you the best and continue the crusade on our behalf. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.